Greetings, fellow humans. Welcome to the discussion table. My name is Sean on the Milwaukee, Wisconsin side of the table. On the Columbus, Ohio side, we have Alex Dollenmayer. Alex, who are we and what are we talking about today?
We are an indie pop band called Oh Geeez Not Again, and today we're here to review Haven by Marianas Trench.
You know, I know that this video is going to have a smaller audience than when we talked about Billie Eilish or 21 Pilots. And
Right.
yet I am so much more excited to talk about this album than any of those records, because while there have been bands that I think have influenced my idea about how to, be in a band and what that looks like, how you market that, there is not any other band, at least for me, that has influenced what pop music and a pop album can be the way that Marianas Trench have.
Yeah, so I know last time when we did Scaled and Icy and Clancy, we talked about how 21 Pilots are a huge influence for us. But with Marianas Trench, for me personally, and I know for you, just the way that they construct an album is not like any other band that they're similar to. And that's something we've definitely taken inspiration from. And they still maintain that album structure while just putting out great pop songs.
Absolutely. So obviously we are from the U.S. and Marianas Trench have never really had a hit in the U.S. Very unfortunate, but I'm curious, so how did you find out about Marianas Trench?
I think it was probably just by association. They were always paired with the Fall Out Boys and the Panic at the Discos.
Right.
And that makes sense to me, definitely to a certain extent. I think something like Masterpiece Theater definitely caters more towards that emo pop rock sort of sound. I mean, I think it was all around the same time that I always reference with you of 2015. So maybe 2014, 2015. Going further back, one of my dad's favorite bands and one of my favorite bands too, Jellyfish, is one of the biggest sources of inspiration for Josh Ramsay. So my dad had found them sort of at a similar time. And so I feel like I was always bound to find them, even if, they haven't had hits necessarily in the States. I feel like they're still talked about enough in the music community and especially in that sort of smaller niche scene.
Yeah. I found them about the same time too, in like 2014. It was at a very critical time for me because prior to that, I had been all about country music. My parents listened to country music. I had this fascination with Nashville and everything that went on down there. But by 2014, I was looking for other stuff to listen to. And I had wandered into the wild and wonderful world of YouTube music reviews and had found a review of Marianas Trench and just a glowing review of their album. And I wanted to check it out. And I think from that point on, the first song I ever heard from them was Pop 101, that one-off hit they had in 2014 in Canada. And that was the perfect song for me to hear first because it very much has this love of pop music while also kind of being a little bit above it and kind of looking down on it like, we could do it like this, or look at how they do this. And coming at it from that angle was the perfect introduction for me to this band because their calling card really is they take popular styles and they add this theatrical, arranged instrumentation, these big vocal elements. And that to me has kind of become this measuring stick by which I look at other pop music and other pop albums and the music that we make too. I'm always just like, how does this match with Marianas Trench? So when they put out a new album, and it's very rare that they put out a new record. They go long periods of time without new music. So this year coming into Haven, their first new record in 5 years, what were you expecting? What were you looking for from this record?
It's strange because I can't believe it's been that long. I feel like Phantoms, I have a vivid memory of that coming out when I was in college. And for this album, I feel like the rollout kind of started out of nowhere.
Right. I was also very surprised when the first song came out. Because
Josh Ramsay obviously did his solo thing, which I liked a couple songs here and there, but it was just sort of this weird waiting period where he was doing that. I don't think it was until they really started hinting at a normal life that I was like, oh wow, I forgot that this is like such a big deal to my music taste. And so I'm glad that when they announced the album, it wasn't far out from when they were putting out those singles. You know, some bands will wait. There will be such a long period of time between them, but I'm glad that we have the album now. Expectation wise, I think I just honestly wanted an improvement over Phantoms. I don't want to speak for all fans, but I think that a lot of people were a little let down by that. No matter what, following up Astoria was just going to be a tough task, and they were craving the cinematics and overarching concepts and longer track lists too. Yeah, I think that was the main thing I was looking for.
You know, I will say, kind of me a little selfishly going into it, there were two things that came up. The first of which being, you know, when I saw that it was a hero's journey, and that's what the framing device for this record. They always have a different framing device for their records, right. And with this one being the idea of this literary device of the hero's journey, this framing structure, there was a part of me that was a little worried because we are also putting out a record very soon that deals kind of with a hero's journey, and I was like, oh no, I do not want to go against Josh Ramsay in my concept album making abilities. Right. So they went a kind of a different direction than we did with it, but that was kind of top of mind to me. Was just like, okay, what is this story going to be this time? You know, how are they going to kind of bring in this idea? And as we got closer to the record and finally getting to hear it now, I also think it's kind of interesting that right before this record came out, just a little ironic, that right before we both listened to this album, we were talking about Sabrina Carpenter's new album, Short and Sweet. And you had said that it was kind of odd to you that everyone was kind of poring over like, well, who are these songs about? What is this about? And how, for a lot of folks, that's kind of what gave the record so much life, was this kind of backstory behind it. And I think that's really interesting going into Haven, too, because if you don't know the story of Marianas Trench and their music beyond the framing devices, beyond the styles, I don't know that this record would hit so much for you. This feels like a record that is for the people who have been around for a long time and who know where this band comes from, who knows where the music comes from. And this is kind of a celebration of that and also kind of a closing of this chapter. And I thought that's a really interesting thing, and I really want to get into more of that as we talk about the songs.
Definitely. I think that one of my biggest takeaways from this album is basically just what you were saying. It is littered with fan service. So like you said, if you haven't been with this band for a long period of time, if this was your starting point, I think it would make very little sense to you. I'll obviously get into a lot of that later, but I definitely get where you're coming from.
So with that, should we dive into the record? Or should we kind of give a little backstory as to kind of where the story has kind of come up to this point with the band?
Yeah. So let's get into that, because I think that that's kind of necessary for context.
So the story of Marianas Trench and what they write about in their music, they always have a different kind of framing device. Masterpiece Theater, their record in 2009, was like kind of structured around this idea of like you're watching a Broadway musical, you're watching a stage show. Ever After in 2011 was this dark fairy tale kind of Tim Burton kind of thing they were going with. Astoria was this 80s adventure movie, and Phantoms was like a haunted house. Underneath all of that, and I think they've been very careful to not ever make this the selling point of their music, but underneath that, the music has always been about lead singer Josh Ramsay and his very on-again, off-again relationship with his now wife, Amanda McEwen. In Masterpiece Theater, it's about the beginning of their relationship. Ever After, it's about the many ups and downs, but kind of ending on a happy note. Astoria is about this big breakup. Phantoms was about Josh very much not being over that and still grappling with his lingering feelings towards her. And now Haven, dealing with them getting back together and finally getting married and starting a family together. And to see the story kind of come to this moment is a really interesting thing to keep in mind throughout the record. It's a way to really frame what's happening in the music, but it's also this coming home celebration in the music that ends up happening by the end.
I also think, and I know Josh said previously that his whole goal with this album is that he's essentially tried to tell a version of this story every time, but this time he wanted to be the most blatant about those plot points, and to me that's incredibly obvious on this album. I'd say this is the most linear in terms of the actual story that plays out. Yeah. In that every single song is trying to hit a certain plot point in that structure, in the hero's journey structure.
Well, I think we've done enough backstory on this. Let's start talking about the song. So we start off in typical Marianas Trench fashion with a big multi-part opening track with A Normal Life. Now, this was released as a single prior to the album coming out. The first time that they've ever released the opening track of their record kind of as a lead single to it. And I thought that going back to how we talk about a lot about how this record feels like it's very much made for the fans who have been there, that move in particular felt like it was very much geared toward the fans, because fans of Marianas Trench, they don't really want to hear the radio single first. They want to hear the big opening track. That's what they're here for. So I think to start it off that way was very intentionally aimed at bringing the fans back on board after such a long time away. I think you and I had kind of a different opinion about that, though, when this came out. You kind of stated it very well. I think you want to give your thoughts on when you first heard A Normal Life.
Yeah, obviously Marianas Trench is very known for the opening and closing tracks. Like, that is such an exciting thing for me as a listener. I mean, even on Phantoms, like Eleonora being the a cappella thing, sure, it's only a minute long, but that needs to be experienced as track one. Absolutely. And I think it totally makes sense why they did it this way, because in the past, when they released One Love for Astoria or I Knew You When for Phantoms, obviously it's just hard to grasp the album, and sometimes fans are sort of put off by the initial singles. So it totally makes sense to me. But with that said, you need the context of the album. I as a single, I never went back to this song. I think I mentioned that to you. So I purposely just stopped listening to A Normal Life. I maybe heard it 3 times before this album came out because it just felt wrong. Like, it felt like I'm not supposed to hear this yet. That's definitely just coming from someone who likes to listen to albums in full. I'm not a huge fan of when bands will release like almost the entire first half of their album. Obviously, this isn't exactly a half, but the first 4 songs were already out, which is always sort of a weird listening experience because I already have experienced these songs individually a lot more. It just feels weird to then go play the album for the first time. It doesn't even feel like I'm hearing it for the first time. So that's my thing with that, and I assume, you still feel the same way.
I think that this idea of context is massively important with this album, because pretty much every song is recontextualized when taken as the whole of the record. I also only really listened to A Normal Life as a single once or twice when it came out. That being said, now that I have the context of the rest of the record, I think the song is really great. I think we had both kind of underrated it a little bit when just taking it as a single. There's a lot of really cool elements here. The production, Josh is such a great producer, and he's always got a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of these cool little synth elements. There's a lot of really cool synth moments on this whole record. This song really sets it up. Melodically, some of his best melodies, great vocal performance, and I think that getting to hear it now as this opening track to the rest of the record has really improved how I think about it. And I wonder if you feel the same way about that.
Yeah, so we are in the exact same position. I had a feeling this would happen, but this song is so much better in the context of the album, which is exactly what I thought would happen. Obviously, later on, you have so many different callbacks to this lyrically, melodically, sonically. There's those heavier guitars, something that maybe would have felt more in line with something on Masterpiece Theater or something. But they also still, I think they're pulling from, throughout this whole album, they're pulling from elements from every other
Yeah,
album that they've
definitely.
come out with. And I think that this really captures that. And when I keep hearing this album, now being maybe like 4 times through, this song is so much better.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I wish it wasn't ever released as a single. Like it almost felt like the feeling I get when I listen to a leak and I feel guilty, like in advance of an album, because it just, again, it didn't sit right with me. But now that I have this whole thing and I can see the trajectory of where it goes from here, totally makes way more sense. Also, obviously, super cinematic. I feel like that almost goes without saying.
But cranked up to even a bigger degree than I think we've almost ever seen with them before. Like this,
Definitely.
more than anything, feels like a film score. There's so much emphasis on the strings. There's so much emphasis on these distorted synth tones and white noise. There's just a bunch of audio elements that make up this song. And getting into what you said about the guitar tone coming back from like a Masterpiece Theater era or a Fix Me era, first sign that this record is going to be very all-encompassing. To see that all play out, again, with the context of the record, big word of context here, this song is a great opening to where this record is going to take us.
I think one of the main complaints, if I can say that, for Phantoms was that it fully leaned into the pop thing. I mean, they've always been a pop band, but production-wise, it was super modern, even sort of calling back to like 2015, like Chainsmokers type music. And you don't hear that, really? Like I feel like I've mentioned that before. Don't Miss Me, for example, to me is so...
Don't Miss Me, I guess. I mean, I don't know that I would go to the Chainsmokers as my first influence for that record. It feels a little bit more adult contemporary. It fits more, I would say, in line with like an Ed Sheeran kind of record or a late period Panic at the Disco record than the Chainsmokers.
That's probably a better comparison. And I think Marianas Trench pulled that sound off pretty well. But I do think there were a lot of fans that sort of rejoiced at the heavier guitars and heavier drums, which is something I'll get into later. Drum-wise, Marianas Trench has never been a band that I go to where I'm like, oh, I love this part or that part, because there's so many elements to their songs that Ian doesn't do a lot of like flashy fills, or the drum sounds are a lot of times either programmed or they'll just be these big like orchestral toms, that sort of thing. This album actually has a lot of diverse drum sounds. Some I definitely like more than others, but a lot of cool parts too, and I think A Normal Life sets that up pretty well.
I want to call attention to one line before we move on here. The central line of this song, there are many central lines of this song that come back, but I think one of the most important ones is everything almost fits together right. I think that in the sense of just this record, but also in kind of a meta sense, that will keep coming back a little bit. And that's, I think, a very good line to highlight right away. But we go from this big opening track to the first kind of proper single from the record, which was Lightning and Thunder. Now, I know a lot of folks obviously were very excited by A Normal Life and this return to this cinematic style. This actually, Lightning and Thunder, was the song that actually got me really excited about this record, because I think that might be an unpopular opinion, but I think this is one of their best singles. And I know a lot of people don't think that, but to me, this one was almost immediate. The way the song is constructed, I think it's just a very perfectly done pop song, but also an update on their style, which is something that I'll get into a little bit later. But what were your first impressions of Lightning and Thunder?
I mean, I totally agree with you. I would have been perfectly fine if this was the first single. I've only been a part of the 2 previous album cycles, obviously. Became a fan in 2015. But to me, this is the best out of all of their single choices. This is actually one of my favorite pop songs of the year.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And still with that extended intro, that also makes so much more sense to me in the album, because after A Normal Life, you kind of need a minute to segue into this. This song just straight up starts with essentially like a 45-second, I don't want to call it an interlude, but like just an intro to this song. And that feels really good to me after A Normal Life. But something I'm going to draw a comparison to that you may not have the same sort of feeling towards this, but when I've been listening to this song over and over again, the thing that I can draw a comparison most easily is actually All Time Low's Last Young Renegade, which is the most controversial album in their catalog. If you are familiar with that album, you may know what I'm talking about. Melodically, there are so many moments here, especially that, I think it's the pre-chorus, face to face with who we are. It is so All Time Low doing their like pop 80s kind of thing, or synth pop thing. But separate from that, this chorus just always gets stuck in my head. It may be the strongest chorus on this album. Works well on its own, works well in context. I love this song. Like, I don't think there's a single thing I would change about it.
I want to geek out a little bit about the production of this song, because when I listen to it, that's where my mind goes. I love how this song feels like a thunderstorm. Like, there's this pelting synth arpeggio that runs all the way through it. There's these big crashing drums. There's these stabs of synth in the chorus. It really is a production marvel. And you listen to how they work together with the vocal melody too. The kick drum punches up certain lines in the chorus. And when you dig into the minutia of it like that, you really see how much thought goes into this. And I think that that's something that has been true of almost every Marianas Trench record, but very true of this record. Everything about the way this was constructed was so meticulous. And I think that as a writer, as a producer, as a singer, like, this is what you should aspire to when you're putting together a record, where you can pick out little ways that they all interact with each other. That's just something that I always look for in a song. And I think that the way Josh and the guys put this together here is really incredible. I will say one thing about this song that is a little bit of a head scratcher to me is just its placement within the story. And this is something that I've kind of been going back and forth on as I've been listening to this record, because the way that Josh has kind of laid these out, if you look at the notes, he has each of these songs attached to a certain element of the hero's journey. And he calls this the call to adventure. And I would strongly push against this being the call to adventure. This is a celebration of an adventure that has already happened. But I think that if you were to move this further down in the track list, it wouldn't quite belong. There wouldn't be a place for it. So I can see putting it at the head of the record, but I think that even when we first saw the track list, we were like, Lightning and Thunder is track 2? That doesn't quite make sense. But either way, I definitely think the record would be incomplete without this song. It needs this strong single. And if this is where it fit, then more power to it. I won't complain about too much about it being a little out of sync with the story. But it's a great song, and I'm glad that it's here on the record.
I think there is this dichotomy on the album where every song has to have a piece in that, what is this one, Call to Adventure?
The Call to Adventure,
Yeah, I would never think that. It feels more like something that could have been written separately from the concept, and then it was just sort of, I guess this goes here. And that's okay with me, mainly because now that I've heard the whole thing, this is like the haven't had enough after ever after.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so just from an album construction sense, like sonically, like you said, I can't imagine this as like a track 10 or track 11 or something. Yeah. Like it would just get buried. Just one last thing on the production. It's fun for me to hear you be excited about that, because I think that kind of stuff gets so overlooked. It's just brushed off as like, oh, it's a pop song. Okay, but do you know like how much construction goes into like each individual part there that fits so nicely together? I think that just in general, pop music doesn't get enough credit often. I think it's a lot harder than people make it out to be.
Marianas Trench was the band that made me appreciate it. Like, I think to come in from that level and this as an outsider, and especially growing up listening to country music, where they tell you that, oh, everyone who makes pop music is fake and has no talent, like all that stuff, and to see that is so not true at all. Like, these folks who are making pop music have way more abilities than half of the guys in Nashville do. And it's to see a band that really embraces that aspect of it is very cool. But I want to say one other thing about the structure of this song. Marianas Trench have always had this very standard verse, chorus, bridge, chorus structure to their music. For as experimental as they can be with the styles, for as many arranged orchestral elements and vocals they can put on it, the structure has always remained that way. Lightning and Thunder is not that way. It is verse, chorus, outro. And I think for a lot of fans, that feels kind of abortive. But I actually think that it is Josh working with a different kind of structure. And you can say that that structure may be a little bit more modernized for like a TikTok audience where the music has to be shorter. And for these first couple songs, I might agree with that. But as you get further and further in the record, you see that they still are doing a lot of experimentation with that kind of structure, where you can get a lot more out of it than just, you know, kind of saying like, oh, this was shortened because they want to make shorter songs now. There's a lot more experimentation going on with that, and I think that this song is the first glimpse of that with its big intro and its big outro. You start to see that there's a different structural approach going on in this record that you might not have seen in the previous 3 or 4 records.
And I think while I may have initially been like, oh, this song is really short, now that I've heard it so many times and I just love the song so much as is, I don't really wish it was longer. I'm perfectly content with the length. I guess people could write it off as like, oh, they're catering towards songs being shorter now, but that is very obviously not the case when you get into like the later half,
in the back half of this record,
especially.
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't feel by the time it's done, I'm like, oh, it's missing another part or something.
Mm-hmm. But hey, you want to talk about short songs? Let's talk about track number 3 called I'm Not Getting Better. I'm not getting better. Now, this was another one of the lead-off singles to the record. And I remember you had some opinions about this one when it first came out. As the drummer of our band, would you like to talk a little bit about your opinions about this song when it first came out?
Right. It's so interesting because we sort of experienced this song together in a way, because you had sent me the original snippet and you were like, oh, this is better than, I don't remember what you cited, but
well, we'll talk a little bit about the stylistic influences of this song in a minute. Yeah.
So we heard that snippet and you and I were both like very excited by that chorus. Just because that's another, like Lightning and Thunder, it's just super catchy. And then I was at your house when I heard the song for the first time, and I listened to it and you were like, so what did you think? I was like, well, I have complaints and I think you'll know what they'll be.
Yeah.
And it's...
And I didn't even have to listen to the song to know what the complaint was going to be.
Right. Definitely it's a drum thing for me. I have no problem with programmed drums. In fact, that's like one of the biggest changes and turns I've had as a drummer over the years, like really appreciating the art of picking different samples and just having sort of endless possibilities when it comes to that. Because sometimes just a drum kit or something that sounds like a real drum kit just doesn't make sense for a song. And it took me a long time to make my peace with that. With that said, I think the sounds that they chose are really like limp sounding and sort of uninspired, bland. The whole production, because of that, feels a bit empty and hollow. And you may think it's crazy to just pin that on the drums, but the drums are a huge part of that. Like those, by the time you get to that first chorus, that should be hitting. We had heard the last chorus in the snippet, and that's what I was expecting, but you only get that in the last one. And it doesn't feel like that's enough payoff. With all that said, I feel like I'm kind of over it now. My complaints, like I feel like I can look past them a little bit more for whatever reason. I really can't pinpoint why that is, but it may be having this whole album and experiencing it in one. Although we had a normal life, Lightning and Thunder, I'm Not Getting Better, previously as singles, I never listened to them all in succession just because I wanted to save that for the album. And I think this song can piggyback off of the previous 2 songs and just gives it more momentum than it does on its own.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so even though I may have that little gripe, it's super catchy. I love the the low vocals, the doo-doo. I can't even remember how it goes, but I love that. The second verse in particular is one of my favorite moments on this whole album. It feels a little "Here's to the Zeros" to me when he's referencing the gospel and the gospel things come in. Like, that's very tongue-in-cheek and fun and very Josh Ramsay. So yeah, this song has grown on me a lot. I would put it actually as one of my favorits.
Wow, really?
Whereas previously,
that's quite a turnaround
I think I
for
would
you,
have.
yeah.
I know. I like talk so much trash, but I'm very glad because I really had sort of predetermined ahead of time. I was like, oh, this will be in one of my least favorites. I'll skip this one. I have no desire to skip this one.
I'm still personally kind of waiting for my come around on this one. For me, it's still a little lower on the record, but I got to say, I will 100% agree with you on the second verse being a great moment. This song in particular, this was something I was kind of thinking about going into this record, is aside from Marianas Trench always having a framing device for each of their records, there's also a unique sonic style that I can associate with each of their records. Like Masterpiece Theater was the pop punk record. Ever After was more like the Max Martin club boom pop record. Astoria was the 80s throwback record. Yeah. Phantoms was kind of more of the adult contemporary thing we had mentioned a little earlier. Not all of those songs fit into that category, but that's kind of the grounding principle of all of those records, is there's always some element that ties back to that. Going into this record, I was thinking, what is the style of this album? And I think you can say that as we go forward, and as we've said earlier, this feels more like a conglomeration of many of the styles they've worked with. But I also think that each of the singles, or at least the songs on this record that feel like they could be singles, each kind of pull from a different sound that's kind of in right now. This one pulls very heavily, I think, from the Nashville producer-made indie pop of a band like the band Camino or Nightly or a guy like Knox. There's a pileup of vocal filters. There's a lot of programmed elements. There's a ton of little ear candy moments, from the harmonies that sweep in to the little chime that rings in your right ear when they say the word chime, all that kind of very producer-heavy stuff. And I feel like, and the falsetto chorus too, even though that's a Josh Ramsay staple, I think that's also a staple of a lot of this indie pop coming out of Nashville right now. You look at a song like I Think I Like You by the band Camino. They're doing that same effect with all these different, pitched elements and synthetic elements all coming together for this song that kind of zigzags all over the place. And that's exactly what they're doing here. I would agree with you that it feels like the first chorus is a bit empty. Like I want a little bit more propulsion in that. So that's kind of the thing that's holding it back for me. But there are a lot of elements I like. One thing I want to point out in that second verse is that it's great to hear Mike and Matt, the bass player and guitarist of Marianas Trench, have a little bit more lead vocal stuff going on. Like they sing different lines of that chorus. And I think coming out of Josh's solo record, there are sometimes moments on this record where I'm like, what makes this song a Marianas Trench song and not just a Josh Ramsay song? And when you hear the other guys in the band coming through on the vocals, that makes it feel more like this is a full band song. And it's great to hear them on this record, more so than I think I may have heard them on previous records. There are many moments starting with this song where they come in and take a little bit more of a front and center position.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because I think rightfully so, Josh Ramsay is, the leader of the band, the songwriter, the one with the grand arrangements. And, I'm not trying to discredit that by any means, but I think the other members are seen as like taking a backseat and just sort of going with what Josh does. But to hear them, like you said, I think probably more than any other album, there's multiple times where specific lines will be given to them or specific harmonies where I feel like Josh would have just done it himself previously. It's really nice to hear that.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to say about this one, especially considering it's your new favorite song now?
No, not really. I always have less to say when I have not as much to complain about. I think it's an interesting segue into the next song. in terms of opinions changing.
Okay, really? Interesting.
And that's yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, so the next song is Down to You, which was the final promotional single off the record. And it sounds like you have some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I remember hearing this for the first time, obviously not too long ago. What was it, like 2 weeks ago or something?
It was about that time, yeah.
Yeah. I liked the song a good amount. Like, I was like, oh, this is another fun, like, pop single. I don't think it hit me, obviously, as much as something like Lightning and Thunder, but I just thought, oh, this makes for a nice, like, piece on this album. The more that I hear this album, like all together, I think while it may be necessary thematically, I could do without the song entirely. I think.
Interesting.
It feels like it could be maybe like a leftover from Phantoms. I also think that the comparison I've seen the most of it being like Stay by Kid Laroi and Justin Bieber, it's really hard for me to now not hear that.
Okay.
And that's not a terrible thing. That's a very like nice pop melody. I just don't feel like I have any reason to come back to this song specifically, whereas Lightning and Thunder and I'm Not Getting Better feel a lot more distinct to me. They draw on these modern pop elements, but this song to me is just a little generic, and it does get more into that sort of Marianas Trench territory in the bridge. But this is one where the length, I think, really gets to me. It doesn't even feel like a complete thought to me. Whereas the previous two songs, even though they're shorter, they still do it for me. Like, I'm okay with them being short. This one, I don't think it's bad by any means, but it's very middle of the road for me.
Okay, I'm glad we have a difference of opinion on this one, because you came around on I'm Not Getting Better. I have really come around on this one. This is one where I first heard it and I was like, it's okay. I think the more I hear it, the more I can really appreciate a lot of the craftsmanship behind it. This definitely 100%, as you said, is Josh getting his Charlie Puth on. Like, this is a very Charlie Puth kind of song, and just how mathematical all of it feels. It feels designed to be for the radio, very in one ear, out the other. But in between all that, I think there is a lot of stuff I really do like about it, specifically the melodies. I think I can pick pretty much every song on this record and say that the melody is just so meticulously crafted, and there are so many moments where it gets stuck in my head from just that all about you with or without you. I love how that sounds. I love the little ooh on the pre-chorus, and even that chorus too. It just kind of loops over and over. When he says, like, he just is over and over trying to replace her, but he can't do it. It feels like, it's just going around and around in his mind. Like, I just think that's a great sonic visual for the song. Beyond that, I do wish it had been allowed to get a little bit more aggressive. Like, I can hear this being more of a pop punk song and less of a radio pop song, and I think that could have opened it up a little bit to hear it done more like a celebrity status from Masterpiece Theater. I think that could have really done a lot for it. As it stands, though, I do like the song. It's fun to sing to. I can appreciate where it is. I will also argue that if any song is the call to adventure on this record, it is this song. Like, this song, more than anything, he says it verbatim. The story starts, it's all about you, with or without you. Like, if that's not the mission statement of this record, I don't know what is. Like, the idea that no matter what he does, he's always going to keep returning to her and wondering what might have been. And I think for me, this is kind of where the story of the record really starts.
Yeah, it's funny that I think it's labeled as Meet the Mentor.
Yeah, we won't get into how that is completely incorrect, but
right. Well, it's funny because I heard Josh say, "Oh, the mentor is telling him this is about you. It all comes down to you." I'm like, well, no, like,
that's not what the song is about.
Then,
yeah.
like, that's like, yeah, I just, yeah, it to me that definitely makes more sense as call to adventure. And my last complaint, I really don't want to harp on this too much. It's I think going to be the last time I say it on this album, which is good. Mm-hmm. You saying the thing about this being like it could be like a pop punk kind of thing. I hear like a big like kick snare.
Yeah.
Like and the snare sound that they use and the kick sound are kind of like dull sounding, pretty poppy, and it's like I could imagine this thing like really kicking.
It could,
and I think that would probably help me a little more, just even for my own bias.
You even listen to Stay, which everyone is comparing this to. The drums on that are just these really powerful samples.
Yeah,
that really
it's got like a real punch to it.
And this just doesn't have that. I feel like they wanted to keep the strings like more center focused, because that's kind of the Marianas Trench calling card, is that arranged those orchestrated strings. So I think they wanted to keep that more in focus. But yeah, more drums would have really kicked this into high gear. But I agree. I think that this also is the last time that I would have any complaints about the drums. Well, no, I can't say that. I can't say that because we have to talk about the next song, Now or Never. These are the dreams we're fighting for. I'm actually curious. I know I've been asking you to start with the discussion on these, but I have some very specific thoughts on this song, and I want to know what you think about it first.
First of all, I'm going to draw one more comparison to Last Young Renegade by All Time Low. This is so similar to their song Good Times. The chorus having these like big synths and just having these hits with the kick. It is so, I honestly can't believe how similar it feels to me, at least. Besides that comparison, I will say, oh no, I always hate doing this. I don't like this song really at all, to be honest.
No.
I think that after those 4 songs, even with my complaints about Down to You, this is probably the least memorable, or one of the least memorable songs on the album for me. I don't know if I could recall to you how it goes right now. I feel like it builds to something with not a lot of payoff. It just sort of, I like the segue into the storm, but it's like, I don't know if I needed this to even be there. Like, I feel like after Down to You, you've got your, what I'm going to call to adventure. Now we're into the storm. Like, I don't know if I need, I can't even remember. Is this like Tess or something? I'm getting all the like.
Yeah, this
called?
is Crossing the Threshold, which I'm actually going to say I think that this actually is a very strong connection to the hero's journey. I think that this is actually one of the songs that works very well with that framing. I actually think that with a couple tweaks, this could be one of my favorite songs on the record.
Fascinating.
Because I want to start with this. I know there are far showier vocal performances on this record, but this to me in microcosm is an absolutely jaw-dropping vocal performance. Just in how controlled and how expressive it is. When he says in the chorus, all this time that I've been loving you, there's a little quiver in his voice. It's like, it's so hard to replicate that. It's a masterful performance. And you draw the All Time Low comparison. The song that came to mind.
I know what you're going to say.
What am I going to say?
Is it Justin Bieber?
It is Justin Bieber. This is them getting their Justin Bieber by way of John Bellion on. And
oh my gosh. As you were talking about that and singing that melody, I was like, wait a minute. I think I'm drawing on the wrong song. And then instantly I was like, oh, it's just anyway, like, yeah, you are the
only one I've ever loved. Yeah, it's exactly the same setup.
That's
it's
crazy.
A little bit more retro. Leans a little bit more R&B on the verses, and I love those verses. I love the faster flow to that versus the more drawn out chorus. There's that call and response with the lead vocal and the backing vocal. It's so good. I love it so much. But then the song starts building up, and you think, okay, here it is. It's going to just explode on this last chorus. That's what Anyone by Justin Bieber does. That's what Haunted by the band Camino does, which is my favorite band Camino song. And then it just doesn't really do anything.
That's what I'm saying. It just goes into the storm. And then Into the Storm builds again. And it's like...
And see, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like, they will show many more times on this record that they can pull off a crescendo. And I understand that maybe they were like, okay, we don't want to pull this same trick 100 times on the record. But man alive, if this thing had built to a really compelling crescendo with the big drums, this could have been an all-timer for me. I love it that much. Yeah. Dang,
that's crazy.
I really do, yeah.
Would you put it as one of your favorites even with that issue?
No, I wouldn't. I think I hinted to you at this a little earlier, but there were 3 times on this record when I was listening to it the first time that I stood up and I was just like, wait, I need a moment. And after failing to get the crescendo on this one, I was just like, I was like, I need a moment. I need to deal with my disappointment here that this didn't go where I wanted it to. This was the only time, though, on the record that I stood up out of disappointment. The other times were a much more positive standing up moment. No, this one is just, there are so many elements that I love so much. I love the vocal performance. I love the way it's arranged in those verses and into the chorus. But man, if that had been given a proper ending and crescendo, I really think this would have been one of my favorites on the record.
One last negative I'm going to say about this song that is the most nitpicky thing I could ever say. Okay. And depending on, I don't know how people will respond to this, depending on how many people see this. I think it's probably because I'm in like mix master mode for our album right now. There is a mix choice that I can't stand on this song. Okay. I actually like, it actually bothers me. In the chorus, there's like this, I'm sure that's not what it is, but it's like this gong hit almost, pan to the right. And it is the loudest, most distracting thing. I'm going to ruin this for people that like love this song. Maybe you don't bat an eye at it, and sounds like it should have been like pretty tucked back in the mix. And it is louder than Josh's voice. Again, the most minor of nitpicks. If I loved the rest of this song, I wouldn't mind this. The first time I heard it, I was like, I thought it was a mistake. Like I thought I was hearing something else. I think that's one of my few like nitpicky things on this album.
Well, now folks, you'll have to go listen to our record and tell Alex how badly he mixed everything on our record.
Like certain choices.
Okay, yeah. But as we've been talking about, this song goes right, and I mean right, into the next song.
I can barely tell the difference. When I heard the album for the first time, I didn't have it in front of me. Like, I didn't know what song was next, basically, which I prefer to do for an album like this, where I know that it's probably going to segue. So I didn't know that this song had started, and it took me a minute to realize that it was a different song, which I think is cool. I love that kind of stuff.
We talked about that on our Billie Eilish record, how everything flows together, and that was something you loved about that record. But let's talk about Into the Storm. I think for a lot of people, this is really where the record starts to pay off its promise.
Yeah, I think this is fully back into the theatrics that you would expect from Marianas Trench. The thing I've seen going around that I said to you is this is the most Marianas Trench album to ever Marianas Trench. This song is a perfect example of that. I think story-wise, this is the hero's journey thing. Yeah. Whereas like you could have loose interpretations of the other songs that may have not fit certain plot points along that journey, but from this point on, that hero's journey is pretty well laid out, I think, in comparison to these previous songs. I also just love this song, which feels good after one of my least favorites. Production-wise, I'm absolutely gonna praise the drum sounds. Mm-hmm. Can you believe it? When the kick comes in with like this staccato piano,
yeah,
I'm like,
that's a great mix.
Is amazing. It is perfect.
Into the storm.
Yeah, I want to get more of your thoughts before I go more into this one.
I weirdly don't have many thoughts on this. It's one that I really do like. I don't know that I'd say I love it. It's not one of my absolute favorites on the record. It's certainly a very captivating listen, and I think that kind of like I said earlier, Marianas Trench's calling card has always been they take a popular sound and kind of beef it up with strings and harmonies and these arranged elements. This feels to me like a sound that is kind of uniquely their own. Like, this is this very orchestral kind of pop sound, and I can't readily point to another artist that would make a song that sounds like this.
That's a good point.
And that's kind of interesting, I think, coming from them. There's a lot of big crescendos that pay off here. There's a ton of dynamic range. There are certain things that I like I like the big kind of synth melody that comes in on the kind of sweeps in on the second chorus. That's a cool touch. It is an interesting choice to repeat the phrase "always on the radio." That was kind of an interesting thing. I was like, okay, what exactly is this? But that could kind of be a meta thing where it's like, okay, you know, all of their songs, again, being inspired by Josh's relationship and him having to kind of live that over and over and over again every time he sings the songs. That's something that came up in Dearly Departed back on Astoria, and something that they might be hinting at here as well. Other than that, the only other thing I want to call out is that it's not giving up, it's surrender is a great line. It's not that we failed to move on, it's that we were destined to do this. And that's just a cool sentiment. It fits with that big hero's journey idea.
Yeah. For me, well, maybe it's not like a song I could easily recall in terms of, because that was sort of my thing with Now or Never, of like how memorable is it to me. I don't know if I'm there with the song like I am with something like Lightning and Thunder, but I can really appreciate those dynamics that you mentioned. I feel like it's my duty to harp on this, but this song in particular, drumming wise, has some really cool parts, cool fills, cool tom sounds that they chose. And then they switched to this like punk sounding kit,
right at the very end.
Yeah. And that's just a really odd choice that I think is cool. I think that's very unexpected. And while maybe somebody could say it's like out of place, I don't really care. I just think it's a really cool sounding thing. I would list this as one of my favorites, especially because I do think this is like we're getting like really getting somewhere now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this was definitely one that stood out to me from my first listen.
All right, well, I think we can move on to track number 7, Waffle House by the Jonas Brothers.
You say Waffle House, I just say Yesterday.
I know. I think Yesterday is the more apt comparison, but I don't know. There's something about this that just says restaurant jingle to me. You know, the same way that Waffle House did. What are your thoughts on ancient history?
I feel like I'm gonna. Maybe it'll surprise you. Maybe it won't.
Okay.
I love this song. This is like, I love Waffle House, I love Yesterday, and I love this song. I just think this song has got a real punch to it. Like, the verses are super groovy. I like the melodic callback. I think it's the pre-chorus that does there's a melody from A Normal Life. I feel like I can very rarely pick up on this. Like, even in callbacks in our songs, you'll have to ask me, like, did you hear this thing that I did? I'm like, no. And so that was something that definitely stood out to me. I love the saxophone, love me a good saxophone. I don't know if I necessarily needed this song to exist. Like, I think Yesterday fills that spot in their catalog, but I don't care. It is so much fun. I think placement-wise, like from an album standpoint, I'm not talking about the themes or anything like that, which is the hard thing to talk about with this album, is there's that side of things and then there's just the album listening side of things. That part feels really odd to me, but I don't care. Like, as far as songs I'm going to come back to, I'm going to go back to this one probably just as much as in Into the Storm, even though Into the Storm as a song to me is much more impressive. But yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
Well, I'm glad you love it, because I think this is my least favorite on the record. I hate to say
Oh my
it.
gosh, we are going to have some interesting opinions.
Yeah, this is the one that I like the least. I like my 80s throwbacks to have a bit more muscle and groove to them. And this, with its just dun 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 dun, you know, drum and bass line.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no, No, I'm sorry. This just feels like the background music for an ad about how great the sales at your used car lot are. I
think I kind of like that stuff.
Maybe you do. Maybe you do. Maybe this is just a me thing. But like I've obviously heard them do 80s stuff with so much more just force to it, and this to me just kind of feels really, really limp. Even the saxophone part is just like it's just this unadorned saxophone with like nothing else going on, and I'm like,
but the little like
know.
who we are now, that is so much fun.
Maybe
wow.
Maybe
this is actually one of like my greatest disagreements with you yet. Like I actually think that's insane.
I'm sorry. This one's not for me. But I will say, and maybe we're going to disagree more on this later. I think this is the last song on the record that is anything less than great.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm going to go there.
Oh, my gosh. That is not what I think at all. Oh, man.
All right, well, we're about to get into the back half of this record, which everyone says is where it really picks up. So here we go. So okay, a difference of opinion on ancient history, but let's move on to something a little bit more cut and dry, which is track 8, Stand and Fight.
Stand and fight when you've had.
Now
how about you start with it?
This one is I really like this one, and it's I think it's an interesting touch because I've talked about how there are moments kind of after hearing Josh do a solo record where I can ask, okay, what separates this from being a Josh Ramsay solo project and into being a Marianas Trench song? This one, I think more than anything, feels like a Josh Ramsay solo song. Like it is a very stripped back thing. There's no drums, there's no bass, there's no guitar. It's just Josh and some synths and some strings. And yet I feel like that works for this because he's going for a very classic kind of pop delivery here. And I think that for a moment where you just kind of step back and let your front man do his thing, he steps up. This is another great vocal performance. It's not showy, but it's very dynamic. It's very rangy. In a just world, I feel like this song would become the next great award show victory song where your contestant sings this. It's just a good all-purpose song, but I like the lyrics too. I think when you've got a song where you pull back a lot of elements, the lyrics have to stand on their own. And I think they really do here in delivering this idea of like, all right, you're living in this fantasy where you're asking what could have been, but are you willing to put in the work to actually make that happen? And this idea at the end of, I love the line of, it's not the fall, it's the getting up. It doesn't matter where you failed here. What matters is, what are you going to do next? We have a song like that on our new record called What Are You Getting Up For? And to see that connection is great. I think that just as a good standalone power ballad kind of song, this fills a gap for me. I like this song.
Yeah, we're on opposite ends. This is the first time, and I said this to you last night, like out of context, where I can like pull the phrase like story over song.
Okay.
This to me feels like we have to hit a plot point, but the song itself does nothing for me.
Okay.
I'm a little surprised that like lyrically you like that was something that you were drawn to because to me, it's a little basic, a little too vague for my liking. The whole repetition, like pretty consistent repetition of stand and fight. I'm like, I'm not feeling it really at all. Like I'll say this, like, and this is something I'm going to get to a lot, and maybe I'm sort of preemptively saying this because I don't think it applies as much to this song. But I used to think when I heard something like Astoria or Ever After, Masterpiece Theater, I used to think I always wanted more of their big opening, closing songs, these grand things from them. But I think with this album, it gets a little lost in that, and it takes me a little bit out of it because I'm like, again, I'm a very album-centric person, but it's funny how much I find myself worrying about the fact that I would never individually come back to this song. Okay. Whereas like I could pull so many things from Astoria, individual songs that you don't need anything else to appreciate Burning Up or Shut Up and Kiss Me, which I don't think you like that song.
I do. I like every song on
you do.
Astoria. Don't accuse me of these things.
Is it not one of your favorites? There's something
It's not
about
one
it
of my
that I know we
favorites,
just
sure, but it's a good song.
Okay, sorry.
Scandalous here.
I said slander. I'm sorry. But who do you love? You know, I could pull so many different songs from there. This feels like almost like an interlude to me. I think you said earlier that there's like so many interesting melodies on this album. This song, I again have trouble recalling melodies. It's hard for me to grasp why this one doesn't exactly hit me very much, but yeah, it's just kind of, it's like the most basic way of writing what you were intending to write. I don't know if that's going to make any sense, but we need a song that's about standing up and fighting. So what are we going to call it? We're going to call it Stand and Fight. Yeah, just not feeling it really at all. Okay. This is probably bottom 3 for me on the album.
Have we hit another bottom 3 one yet? Was Now or Never a bottom 3 for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
I would say so.
So we've got one other one that needs to come yet. What could it be? All right.
I think you should know, but I'm not going to say.
I don't know. See, I like all the rest of these songs. Okay, so we come out of that into something that's much more of the Into the Storm variety with Turn and Run. This one, I think, is interesting because you said something about Stand and Fight where you're kind of like, all right, we need a song about stand and fight, so we're going to say it really bluntly here. I would agree. That song does like hammer its point home. Turn and Run, I'm not 100% sure what exactly this song is about, but it sounds really cool. And I think that alone moves it across the finish line for me. There's again a ton of crescendos on this thing, and the strings are really vamping, the guitars are vamping, we get a big crescendo, we get a big hit at the end there. I think that alone makes it a standout just in, again, how arranged and orchestral it feels, to the point where I'm like, okay, if this was soundtracking a scene in a show or a movie, or it was in my head while I was watching something, this would probably be a knockout punch for me. How about you? How do you feel about Turn and Run? I feel like this is one that is in a lot of people's top 3 on this record.
Yeah, I can see why. I think after Stand and Fight, like that song kind of like threw me a little bit on this album, just because I was so thrown off about just how blatant it was and how much I didn't find myself like gravitating towards the song itself. This song, like in its first half, just because I had to adjust a little of like what I was expecting, I felt like initially pretty similarly about like the way I did with Stand and Fight. But then it's like the build on this in comparison is so much stronger. I hate like reiterating this so many times, but it's super cinematic. Like
yes.
This could be in a movie, you know, especially like instrumentally with the strings and everything. That rock ending obviously just has like a huge payoff. And that's just like objectively awesome. Like I really don't think you could hear this and think like, you know, like as opposed to maybe some other moments on the album, it's just cool. Like it just sounds great. I don't think anybody could ever dismiss that.
It's what the fans want from a Marianas Trench record. 100% it is. There's one production element that I really love. I love when it breaks down and Josh says like, "Welcome to the edge." And it just kind of breaks down to these little synth plucks and the guitar. There's this one perfect church bell toll that is so eerie and atmospheric, and it is a amazing production touch. Again, I'm not really sure what exactly we're doing here. I feel like the story up to this point has kind of been like, okay, there's always something kind of calling him to a different place, but what he needs to do is like, you know, face reality and fight for what he wants. The storyline gets a little murky around here, where it again becomes a lot more about the style and the vibe than actually having a fully cohesive story. But when the style and vibe is this good, I can't really complain.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if any Marianas Trench fan walked away from this song and they were like, I don't really care for it, I'd be shocked. Yeah. Just because this is what you want. Like, and the same could be said for the next one.
Yeah, Worlds Collide.
No secrets safe forever. This is
Wow, where to start with Worlds Collide? I definitely would not have expected this song in the middle of the record. Like on any other record, this would be your show-stopping closing number. And on this record, it's only like the end of the second third of the record. You know,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And it's tough to even like find an entry point with this because there's just so much happening in this song. It starts with this like dead on, like Five for Fighting piano pop mid 2000s thing. And then it immediately takes this dive into this big arranged orchestration. Like this has a full orchestra on it, you can tell. And it's a live orchestra. And the way the piano parts turn into string parts and it just continues to build and build and build. And then, of course, there's the Masterpiece Theater callback. And, you know, I knew that they were going to do that. I had seen people saying, oh, there's a callback to Masterpiece Theater. I thought it was going to be like a tossed off line from the song and not a full recreation of the ending of Masterpiece Theater 3. This was the second time on the record where I had to stand up and go, I need a moment, because it was just so overwhelming to hear all these parts coming together. Masterpiece Theater 3 is such a cool song. I think that it is probably, I would even go so far as to say, is my favorite closer on a Marianas Trench record. There's just so many parts to it. It's something that I've tried to replicate too in our own music with all the different vocal parts going on, and just to hear them so almost effortlessly pull it back in and retool it to both be a callback to that record, but also a continuation of the story of this record. And then the way that the song ends with just that big all my life into the final swell of orchestra. It's like we are operating at a different level than almost anyone else can operate at. And I don't know that a song has ever so lived up to its grandiose title as this one does. It's kind of by birthright a standout on the record.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, it is strange because it is so outro feeling. I still don't think I've quite wrapped my head around that because we still have multiple songs and then obviously Haven, which is like near 9 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it is a little strange feeling. I think the thing I've been able to sort of compare it to, though, is just the big battle in like a superhero movie at the end of Act 2. So this isn't quite the end of like the big battle in like Act 3, but it definitely does have that sort of climax feeling, which I don't think they've ever really, in previous albums, even though Masterpiece Theater did have those, was separated sort of by acts, and so I think that's the closest they've gotten. But like on Astoria, you have End of an Era. On Phantoms, you have The Killing Kind, which is one of my, that might be my favorite outro.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
All of those are also, End of an Era might be it for me. Masterpiece Theater 3, clearly I can't decide. But the note that I wrote down that I can't help myself, I'm sorry, but this is the No Way Home of this album. That is like the initial thing that I wrote down. It's like complete fan service. If you've been with the band for so many years, it is made for you.
Yes, it is.
You can't go into No Way Home without knowing all the previous movies, to catch all the references, to catch all the little Easter eggs. I think, you know, he even says this is just the part and then I don't think he says portray or finishes that line.
Into that.
Yeah, it's another one of those ones, like, it's a straight up movie, basically, like Worlds Collide. I'm even pushing it further, like the multiverse of Marianas Trench albums.
Really,
like
truly it is.
You know, from different things. You mentioned at the top of this that this is a culmination of their previous work.
Yes,
and
it is. Yeah.
I'd be kind of surprised if, let's say, they do an album after this, even though I do think this has some sort of like finality to it, but it's hard to ever know.
We'll get into that, I think, on Haven.
Yeah. With all the callbacks and everything else, it feels like same thing I said earlier at the top. Like, if this is your first album, I mean, you'll think it sounds cool. There's no way you won't think it sounds great. But it won't mean as much to you. But I think as any fan of this band just knows how rewarding it is to hear all these things come together.
And, you know, it's not that it's just fan service either. Like, this works. Like, this works,
and that's
as
the same
song.
as No Way Home. I must
okay,
add.
yes, I'm not accusing No Way Home of not working. Far be it from me.
Right.
But I think that this idea of like, it's not just calling back to Masterpiece Theater because it can. Like, the story started in Masterpiece Theater, and so for that to be this bridge to here, I think it works. I will kind of echo what I said about Turn and Run. I'm not entirely certain what exactly this song is about. Is it about like him getting back together with his wife? Is it about, you know, what is this secret that can't be kept forever? Is this about the birth of their child, which they allude to on the next song on the record? You know, I'm not entirely certain what this moment is. I just know that it is a huge moment that is captured incredibly well in the song.
The reason I say the thing about the fan service and the No Way Home thing is because that is the complaint a lot of people will throw at it of like, oh, it's just fan service. They're just throwing in like eye candy, or in this case, ear candy for the people that know. But thematically and story-wise, I think it still has something to say. Like you said, I don't know what exactly that is, but yeah, I mean,
it feels
this is
important.
easily
Whatever it is, it feels important.
Yeah,
they got
this
that across.
is easily a top 3 for me.
Okay, now we've had this big thing. Now we feel like we got to take it down a notch and go to track 11, which is apparently the next single from the record, which is Nights Like This. Nights Like These, I'm sorry.
When the day's gone, we hold on to the nights like these.
I feel a little worried about asking you what you think of this song because we have to have another bottom 3 somewhere in here, and I worry that this might be it.
You'd be correct, Amondo.
Okay, so tell me why you don't like this song.
I wrote barely anything about this song because I really didn't feel like I had much to say. I don't care for it at all. I think that it is one of their most generic sounding songs, and not in like a good way. This is going to sound really harsh and probably too harsh for what it actually is because it's relatively inoffensive. But it sounds like it's plucked from like, oh, you're not going to like this.
Uh-oh.
Sounds like it's plucked from like a Christian radio station in like 2013.
Okay.
I can't say I like anything about it. Honestly, as soon as I heard the like basic melody, after Worlds Collide, this is like a slap in the face. Like I understand why we need this sort of downer after that. I needed that. This going into like Remember Me By would be I think a terrible decision. That's literally all I wrote. I will gladly, if I'm not listening to this album in full, never ever return to this song.
Well, I guess I must be a bit too basic because this is like a top 5 on the record for me.
Okay.
And you know, I gotta say, I think maybe I'm just an easy mark for this sound, but this kind of like warm piano pop. This just feels good to me. I love the melodies. I love how even as cheesy as it gets with the like vaguely world music, oh na na kind of thing that goes on in there. Josh is a great enough singer, and I think puts enough detail into it too. Like this is kind of Ed Sheeran by way of Andy Grammer for me, and I think that you get a little bit of the best of both worlds there. You get a lot of good detail. You get like shared the side of a hospital bed is a great line. Even we were a candle, got caught in the storm. Yeah, it's basic, but it's effective. And I think that when I think about this as like a radio single, I'm like, yeah, this is an easy go for a radio single. There's always room for this kind of adult alternative music. And I think that if it leaned into more like overwrought sentiment, or if it leaned into something that was more, overly romantic, it'd be a lot harder to stomach. If you put any kind of strings on this, you're immediately going into dangerous territory. But as it is, with just like the vocals and the piano and the drums, I think that coming off of such a big song, it's almost fitting to have this like, lay back and victory kind of moment of like, yeah, I did that, and now it's cool. I like it. It feels earned.
I'm glad that you like it. I think that like dangerous territory you mentioned, if it did dip too far into it, you know, with the strings or whatever, I feel like it already exists in that territory for me.
Okay.
I feel like all the things you're describing are the things I don't like about it. The Ed Sheeran, Andy Grammer of it all, the, you know, whatever. With all of that being said, it's so inoffensive that it's like, sorry to the 21 Pilots fans, this is the last time I'll say it. There's no lavish on this album.
Yes.
There's no, like, I'm not, like, mad at it for existing. As much as I may make it sound like, I guess I did say it was a slap in the face after Worlds Collide, which I guess I still kind of agree with. But when I'm listening to the album in full, every time that I've done it, I'm not like, oh, God, like, skip this one. I can't stand this one. Like I am with Clancy. So while this is one of my least favorites, I don't want to sort of oversell my negativity, even though I don't like the song. So,
Okay.
Does it make sense to me as the radio single? 1,000,000% yes. I don't think I would pick a single other thing on here to be the next thing. In the same way that, you know, Stutter or something like that off Ever After is just, oh yeah, obviously that's going to be the one that's pushed more.
So we go from this radio single into a song that probably in any other era would have been a single. The penultimate cut on the record, which is Remember Me By. Now, when I first saw this track, I thought, oh no, because this sounds suspiciously, like just looking at the title, like Forget Me Not off Astoria, which is one of the only songs that will make me an absolutely blubbering emotional wreck while listening to it. And I was like, oh no, you know, both of Josh's parents have passed away now. Are we going to get like this?
I forgot that you said that.
Yeah,
you were fully expecting that.
Forget Me Not will absolutely destroy me when listening to it. And I was like, oh no, are we going to get another big ballad to like send off this record? And we got the complete opposite with this 80s club not new disco, but a new wave song here. And I just want to say the first two reviews that I saw of this record had this song as dead last in the ranking on it. And I have no idea what these people are talking about because this song is an absolute jam. And I feel like it is one of the only songs on the record that I would classify as just an absolute jam with this funky guitar line and these big gated drums that come straight out of like a Burning Up on Astoria. I love it. It is a top 3 on the record for me.
Yeah, having this as a least favorite is crazy. That's like the wrong opinion. I remember being a little thrown because it feels like it comes out of nowhere. Does this feel to me like it would be like a second to last song on any of their other albums? No, not really. And even from the title itself, I was sort of in the same boat that I thought this was going to be like the Nights Like These, but I ain't mad at it. I feel like there's like, it is just like a powerhouse banger of a song. Like
it is absolutely, and I feel like even more so in the placement on the record, where you're coming out of like the big orchestral song, then you get the quiet radio song, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know, if we're talking about it this way, so if this was like a wedding ceremony, like Worlds Collide is the actual ceremony, then you know you've got like the Nights Like These is walking to the reception. This is the reception. You know, if we want to do it that way, right?
And that's a good point because, like, to me, it's the closest we get in the second half of the album to like the single ready, you know, lightning and thunder, undeniably catchy chorus, super fun. Like, this is really the only song in the second half that has that sort of same punch to it. It's got like this bounce to it, something like you have heard earlier on in the album with the lightning and thunder, or
I would argue that it bounces even harder than those ones do. I mean, this feels like it's in a completely different camp than anything else on the record. Like, you know, yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's why I use the word like powerhouse, because it's just like, it's really got like this knock to it. Like in the same way that I feel about Ancient History, which I almost called yesterday just now.
I wouldn't blame you.
I like that song. Like I already sort of said a lot before, but this is like a heightened version of that, in that it's like this obvious 80s worship, you know, which is nothing new for them, but it's super fun.
It is.
Like, again, least favorite for anybody, I could maybe see that if like you're a little tired of the 80s stuff.
But I'm not. Yeah.
But yeah, besides that, I can't imagine thinking that.
But it is interesting, though, because as I said, like, I feel like this in another era, this would have been a single. They kind of subvert that by having it trail off and immediately go into our big cinematic final track, which is the title track, Haven.
Closer to the storm, all my life, knew it all along.
This is another one where it feels like it's tough to know where to start to attack this, because it is the most sprawling song that this band, known for sprawling ending tracks, has ever attempted. We kind of hinted at this, like each of us kind of saying that what our favorite ending track was. You said it might be The Killing Kind or End of an Era. I would say probably I'm still going with Masterpiece Theater 3 on that, but I think it's a little too close to tell, but this could take it for me, I think, if nothing else, for just how all-encompassing it is.
That makes sense to me, just in the sense that if I looked up like Marianas Trench in the dictionary, well, and nothing about the band would come up, but still,
yeah,
if I looked
you'd see a bunch of stuff about the ocean. Yeah,
right, which is quite a dilemma I have when looking them up.
Yes,
still to this day. But this song is them in the same way that Worlds Collide is that way. I will say it's probably one of my least favorite closers they've done. That sounds bad, but that's only because like it only exists because those other outros exist. It feels like we have to do this, like we have to do the callbacks and that sort of thing. And I'm not against that at all, but like the way that End of an Era or Killing Kind and Ever After, like those sum up their respective records so well.
Yeah.
This one to me sums up like the band more than it does the album.
The record. Okay. Well, I think that has something to do with the fact that, kind of like we've been saying, this record pulls from all of the ones that came before it. You had mentioned this idea of finality here. And I don't know that I quite want to go into that yet, but it is a sensory overload of a song. There's you get the Masterpiece Theater callbacks, you get the Ever After callbacks, you get the Astoria
straight
callbacks.
up like the Ever After intro is just
you
there.
You do, yeah. And it's a song that goes up and down so many times. Like it feels like it finds its place, then it's like, oh, but wait a minute, then it finds its place again. Oh, but wait a minute, and it finds its place again, and then it finally gets to the end. And I would complain about that. I would say that it was like, it's almost like they were trying to make it as long as they could for the sake of making it long. But each of those sections is so well crafted that it would be impossible for me to say that this was just lengthened for the sake of lengthening it. Like each of these sections feels kind of necessary to both conclude the record, but also to conclude this chapter of the band, this story that they've been telling for 15 years now.
Yeah, I feel like it would be odd if after this album, let's say they put out their next one in 4 years or something, if they still had so many callbacks to all these other things, I'd feel like, why are we still doing this? Whereas this makes sense to me as like, again, very obviously written for the fans. Anybody that isn't familiar with, I think, certain parts of their catalog, I think it comes across as a little bit more disjointed than the previous closers, just a little bit. And so, like, by nature, I feel like it's lower for me than the other closers.
Okay.
But it's hard to even compare all of them. They all feel like they're a part of this grander thing and this like this love for like Marianas Trench as a band in general that like, yeah, it's just hard for me to even say that, because even with something like Worlds Collide, which also could easily be a closer, and so like
I feel like Worlds Collide is like the closer for this album.
Yes,
but
that is a
Haven
very good point.
is the closer for this chapter of the band. Yes.
Because we don't know what's going to happen after this. I don't know how much you want to get into this now.
Well, it kind of sounds like Josh doesn't know either. Like that's the ending of the record. Is just like, you know, for all his life, there's been this voice calling him to something extraordinary, but who's to say what makes something ordinary or extraordinary? Like, you know, being with his wife and raising a family might be extraordinary. And it kind of sounds like that's what he wants to do now. Like he went through all this up and down with her to get to this moment that it's now he wants to be able to savor that. And it's interesting kind of compare that, because I said early on that when I heard that Marianas Trench were going to be doing like a hero's journey thing, I was like, well, we're doing a hero's journey thing. Like, our record ends with our protagonist going off into the world and like facing his fears and getting what he wants. But this record ending with a moment of saying like, I might find something just as extraordinary by staying home is kind of a fitting way to end a record where, again, you're talking about ending a chapter that spanned so long and seeing the band go from these indie upstarts to being hit makers to kind of coming down from that and having this nice arc to their career. It would be very appropriate, I think, to kind of say like, okay, we did the thing at this point. Either way, this does feel like a very fitting closer where they bring in everything that they've done. You've seen Josh develop as a producer and as a vocalist and as a writer, and here he is with the biggest fireworks display that he's ever given us, and it hits.
Yeah, and I think that the obvious flip of at the beginning of the record, he's saying, save me from this ordinary life, and then ending, obviously, with extraordinary life.
Yeah.
Who's to say what ordinary is? That is like a beautiful sentiment to me. And I don't think I don't think it was until maybe my second or third listen that, regardless of like any of my complaints or maybe like thematic gripes, from the starting point to the ending point, the fact that we can sort of come to that conclusion is great to me. I think that with time, as I sit with this album, because that's the other thing, like it was the hardest thing compared to the previous albums that we've reviewed. It's definitely like the biggest monster to tackle.
It is, yeah. It's sprawling, yeah.
I had said to you, it's like overwhelming, and so I still feel like with all of my opinions I've given now, I still feel like that could change significantly on repeat listens. I think appreciating it in full and as a story being told, I could see myself getting more and more into that as time goes on.
It's interesting that, again, to go back to this idea of context, where everything being in context here is so important, that this record feels like so much more than the sum of its parts. Because it's not just about individual songs. I think this is kind of what separates Haven from some of the other Marianas Trench records, where on an Ever After or an Astoria, you can pick out singles. And on this one, even the songs that were clearly written to be singles don't feel like they hit as hard as they could when you pull them out of the context of the record. Like when we first heard, I'm Not Getting Better, we were like, we don't really like this. And yet it's grown on us ever since hearing it in the context. And for me, it was true with like Down to You. Even the opening track with A Normal Life, it's about how, not just about these songs' individual quality, but about how they work together as pieces, how they interact with each other. And in that way, it's kind of like I said about Lightning and Thunder, where you've got all these different pieces in that song that come together and interact together. This album itself is kind of a testament to that. How the individual pieces work together is part of what makes it so sprawling and so spectacular to view it as a whole. It again speaks just how meticulous the production of this record really is. Like, it feels like a record that took 5 years to make.
Right, definitely. And I think I'd said a similar thing about the Billie Eilish album, where it's like people were begging for a second album with that, and it's like, to think that wouldn't have taken years as is crazy. I think I feel a little differently than you in the sense that, which is surprising to me, in that I think it's a blessing and a curse for this album that you can't pick it apart as much as you can other albums.
Yes.
I just really can't imagine myself going back to these songs like I do with Astoria and Ever After individually. But I also don't think that's like inherently a bad thing, because you know me, I'm going to like inherently just put on a full album. That's usually how I listen to music. I don't really listen to many like playlists or that sort of thing. So it's a little contradictory for me to even say like, oh, I'm sad I can't pick it apart as much. But I do think that's something special that they've had in the past, where they can have these grand concepts and not be so tied to that. Like someone could still have an easy entry point. Whereas this album, I think it would be the most difficult for an outsider to have entry points.
But I think by this point in their career, like I said,
Maybe they don't need that.
They've had the arc to their career. They know that if you're going to listen to their album at this point, that you're coming at them as a fan of the band.
That's a good point.
So to kind of finish this off, where would you put this? And I know this record has only been out for a couple days, so it's tough to say. And, you know, the growth process with these records can always be a thing. But out of their main discography, starting at Masterpiece Theater, everything that this album encompasses, where would you put it amongst your favorite records from them?
I went very back and forth on that. It's a little unfair because I feel like even going into this, I have too much bias towards both Astoria and Ever After personally that it wasn't going to touch those.
Yeah.
And that's no fault to them. That's like all on me. Like that's all my own bias. To me, it's definitely stronger than Phantoms. It's not even really close. How much better it is, I think. I'm back and forth on whether I think it's better or if I like it more or less than Masterpiece Theater. I think I just need more time with it. Because Masterpiece Theater, there's so many like great moments. Masterpiece Theater 1, 2, 3, especially 3. You know, there's a lot of great like just pop punk stuff, but it still feels like a band that hasn't quite figured out what they are yet. So it's a little hard for me to sort of compare the two. But as I've gotten older and I've had this appreciation for just sort of pop production in general, it's something I've been able to appreciate more in their albums. And then also, too, as someone who just loves movies, like this is like easily their most cinematic, I'd say. Yeah. I think Astoria kind of gets there with like different interludes and stuff, but to me, it's not even... There were like times during this where I was like, it's just like mind blowing. Some of the arrangements on this. When I was writing out my notes, it felt more like I was reviewing a movie than I did an album, which is strange. I don't think I've ever felt that way. But there's moments of like where you want to get up and like clap as if like Andrew Garfield came on screen. And so that's just fun. That's undeniably fun. I don't really know where it sits right now. It could be number 3 or number 4 for me. But how are you feeling?
I would agree with you that it's tough to imagine a new record from them being able to compete with Ever After and Astoria, just because those two are such foundational albums for me, not just as a fan of the band, but as a songwriter. And when I think about what I want an album to sound like, it's like, well, I want it to be like Ever After. I want it to be like Astoria. I will say, though, that I think that, like you said, it's a bit of a curse that I can't pick out like songs here that I know I'm going to return to over and over and over again in the way that I could with those records. But in terms of a full album listening experience, I think this is probably up there with those two as a very cohesive experience. With that in mind, I would probably say that it is my number 3 of their records, up there with Ever After and Astoria.
For me, the only other thing holding it back compared to those other records is just, I think it's slightly more inconsistent, obviously. I have, these ups and downs with this album where I'll have one of my favorite songs and then one of my least favorites and then one of my favorites again. That's going to be something that'll be interesting over time to see how maybe my opinions change. To me, it's no surprise that it's one of my favorite albums this year still.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just so rewarding as a fan, even though I only came in 2015, which I guess now I'm saying that and it's been 9 years.
It's been almost 10 years, yeah.
Yeah, like that's actually insane. And Astoria, I remember getting into them like a couple months before One Love came out as like the lead single. So like I remember like vividly all of that stuff playing out. And I think that an album like Astoria actually has only gotten better and better over time. So I imagine that that's going to be the case for this. So I'm very happy with this, minus my issues, obviously, and our differing opinions. It's still nice to walk away from this and honestly just not be disappointed.
Yeah. and feel, and you know, and I think that's always the thing about a Marianas Trench record, is that you always walk away feeling like you've gone on an adventure, and I think that's what you want to get out of their records, and what we want to, you know, our people to get out of our own music. And so to be able to kind of walk away from it and feel like we got that, that's all I could ever ask for out of a Marianas Trench record.
And to me, it's such a good time for us to be putting out our album, because we're in the midst of finishing it, obviously, and like I'm hearing your influence from Marianas Trench. And for us as a band, this feels like, I don't want to speak too soon, but like our most complete body of work, and something that like as an album makes a lot of sense in context, but then I think also can work outside of that, which is something that obviously Marianas Trench has sort of pioneered in a way. Well,
I thank you for talking with me, discussing this record with me. I appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you listening to us babble on about this record and our thoughts about it. We hope that if you are a fan of Marianas Trench, that you will share your thoughts on Haven in the comments. And if you're a fan of the band, we hope you'll check out our record too, coming out on September 13th. It is heavily inspired by Marianas Trench, and we hope that if you love them, that you'll appreciate what we do as well. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see y'all later. Peace.